All right, so let's work on this example. So we want to build a software for a car dealership, and we want the program to keep track on all the salesmen that the car dealership has. And one of the data that we want to keep track on is going to be some basic information regarding the salesman, such as the first and last name. We also want to track on how many cars the dealership has sold in total, and how many cars each salesman has sold. So we want to make sure we have a counter for all the cars sold in total, and how many cars each of the salesmen are going to be selling. So at the end of the day, the amount of cars sold by each salesman should add up to the total. Also, from within the program, the salesman should be able to increase the number of cars they have sold. So if they finished selling one car, they should be able to go back to this program and then increase the amount of cars sold, like in total, in the global total, and then how many cars that particular salesman has sold during the day. And to how to design this program, we have some constraints that we need to follow. So we make sure that we're using all the concepts we have learned. So to do this, we're only going to work on two classes: the driver and the salesman class. For the salesman's class, what we're going to do is, or what the class should have is, should contain the data related to the salesman, such as the first name and last name, so what we have discussed previously, and how many cars that salesman has sold, so the individual sales. The salesman class should also contain a static variable to keep track on the total amount of cars sold by every salesman in the dealership. So remember, going back to what we have discussed about static, or the static keyword, is that any variable or any member in our class that is set as static is going to be a value that is depending on the class. So that means that the value does not depend on the object. So every instance or every object that we're going to have for salesman, they're going to have access to this static variable. But the value is going to be, since it is attached to the class, anytime we update this value, it's going to be the same for all the different objects. So that's why having the global counter of how many cars the dealership has sold in total is helpful to have it as static, since it's a number that first, if one object sells one car, right? So if one salesman sells a car, they increase not just their own amount of cars sold by that particular salesman, but it also increases the global count, right? Since the object should also has access to that static variable. And lastly, the salesman will contain a static function that's going to print the total amount of cars sold and report how many cars were sold by which salesman. So regarding this function, remember that one of the things that we have discussed, or one of the constraints that we have in static functions, is that since the static function depends on the class and not the object, we don't have access to non-static attributes within the same class, right? Because since the static function depends on the class, and we don't need to initialize an object of that class to have access to this function, it means that we don't have an object, right? And if we don't have an object, we don't have the non-static attributes. They don't have any value. So that's the reason why we say that static function cannot access non-static data or non-static variables. But we're gonna see that we have some workaround around this. It's not gonna be what is this? It's not going to be a workaround that that's gonna work for all cases, but we are able to do certain things, such as initializing the same object inside of the class, right? So in the static function, we can create an object of class salesman, even though we are inside the salesman class. That's also a possibility. But we're gonna discuss the approach once we get there. And lastly, we have some instructions for the driver. So to make it simple, we're gonna say that we only have 3 salesmen. And how we're gonna keep track on all the salesmen is, instead of like having 3 salesman object, or manually initializing those 3 objects, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have an array. So going back to our discussions regarding arrays, right? We're gonna have an array of size 3, and the type of that array is gonna be a salesman, right? So going back to the discussion of arrays, remember that we have arrays, which we're constrained a bit with the size of that array, so how many things we can store inside that array. And also we have array list, which kind of works, if you have taken Python, kind of works exactly the same way as regular lists in Python, where we are not super concerned about the size, because we have almost unlimited amount of like cells or indexes compared to an array, which is fixed size. We're also going to have a loop. You're gonna prompt the user which option they want to do, and we only have 2 options, which is to add a sale. So whenever somebody, so going back to one of the requirements, from within the program, a salesman should be able to increase the number of cars they have sold, right? So we need to be able to ask the user, or the user should be able to increase the amount of sales. Now, since we also are concerned about, we're not only concerned about increasing the total amount of cars sold by everybody, we also want to know how many how many cars a salesman or salesman has sold. If we want to add a sale, we also want to ask which salesman, so we know that which object to also increase their individual sales. And lastly, we're going to have the option to print a report, which we're going to call the static function. And that function is just going to print a report of like how many cars they have sold in total, and then how many cars each salesman has sold. And the exit point of this loop is just going to be printing the report. So as soon as we print the report, we print the report, right? And we also finish the program. So maybe you can think of it as we start the program at the start of the day, right? We add all the salesmen that works on that day, right? And then at the end, when we close, when the dealership is closed for the day, we're gonna call the report function, and then it's just gonna terminate the program. So the next day, they have to start again, and so on. So they start with a counter from 0, right? So that is our imaginary scenario. These are all the requirements, all the constraints, and so now let's just start on the program itself. Okay, so not this. Where's the 1322? Okay, so this is gonna be how we're gonna work on this program. We are going to, since it's gonna be a bit easier for you to see, and we don't want to whenever you go back to this code, make it a bit easier to follow through. I'm gonna have everything in just one file. Just remember that your driver class or your main class, so the ones that is going to contain the main method, should be the one set as public whenever you have multiple classes in a file. If you have everything separated in different files, so for example, I have my driver class here, and then maybe I have another file called salesman, then in that case I don't need to be concerned about there shouldn't be any issues for me to just set this class as public. But if you're working within the same file, this is going to be how you're going to have to do this in Java. So before we work on the driver, I think it's going to be easier to have to clear up the salesman class first. So let's start with the attribute. So let's set this as give me a second. So this is going to be the basic information, so basic info related to a single salesman. So we're using a lot of vertical space, horizontal space. So salesman, yeah. And going back to some of the previous discussion is that all the attributes that we want that we're gonna be declaring in our class, they should like as a rule of thumb, they should always set and it be like declared as private. So we have private string, and this is gonna be for first name, like that. So we keep filling this up for last name. For just a second, I almost wrote second name. Yeah, so private int, to keep track on the individual cell. I don't have a good name for this variable, so maybe just can call it my cells, or we can call it salesman, and then underscore, or just to keep it consistent, we're gonna go with camel case. So salesman, sales. Yeah, I think that should be a good name for this variable. Maybe you have a better name for this, but yeah. And then here we're gonna have the static variable, which is gonna be counting all the global cells. So this member is static because it tracks all sales done by all salesmen. So all sales done by all salesmen. And then this one is also going to be private, because we don't want to access this value right straight away. Basically, it's only going to be visible inside the salesman class. And this one, let's call this global sales, since we have the salesman cells, and this one's going to be the global one. Now, also I forgot the data type. Okay, so for this static value, since one of the imaginary situation that we have made up is that this program we're going to be starting we're going to start this program at the beginning of the day, and then at the end of the day, when we're closing down, we're going to run the report, which is all going to give us the amount of calls sold throughout the day, and how many cars were sold by each salesman, but it's also going to terminate the program. So we can assume that whenever we start this program, we are going to be starting from 0, so it's going to be a new day. So since at the beginning of the day, usually we have not sold any cars yet, we can assume that the initial value, whenever we start or whenever we create a salesman object, we're going to be starting with global sales equal to 0. Okay, so these are going to be all the attributes that we're going to have in a program. The next thing that we're going to be working is going to be the constructor. So for this one, we don't need to. Again, we have the option to specify the default constructor, but I don't think there's anything relevant in the instructions that will require us to do so. So we're just going to have one constructor, or define one overloaded constructor, which is going to be a constructor that takes in just the first name and the last name. So going back to the discussion of constructors, is you declare them kind of similarly to a function, but instead you only have the type. So the name of the class. We don't have any other name. That is how the constructor is going to work. But the similarity is going to start with setting the the parameters. So here we have a string for first name and a string for last name. And since we need to set first name, right, which here we have first name as the name of this parameter is exactly the same as the one in the attribute, right? Since we have this unambiguous or ambiguous situation, what we need to do, we need to be super specific about this to signal to the computer that this dot first name is going to be the value in the attribute, so the class member, and the first name with that does not have the this is going to be the one that we are calling in the argument. So first name, like that. Also, to add a little bit more to this discussion, that this keyword is always going to be referencing the actual object. So whenever we create the object, right, so it's going to be referencing the object. So it's kind of like when you say this object, or like, you know, this object's first name. So you can think of this as, you know, this like statement being meaning this. So this object's first name, like that. Well, we can keep this as it is. So now let's do this for the last name. Equals last name. Now, again, showing you the example that we show you in class is that if for example, if you did not name the parameter value, or I mean not the value, the parameter, you know, exactly the same as the attribute. For example, we could do maybe like fn for first name. Then there's no need for doing this, because, you know, in this case the computer can clearly see, you know, which is which, right? The only time that we need to use this, you know, the only case that is not going to be optional is going to be whenever we have this this case, right? So if we don't have this, then we don't know what belongs to which. Now, the cool thing about most IDEs, maybe also yours, is that whenever you hover or whenever you select, or, you know, you put your cursor over the first name, usually it's going to, you know, just going to highlight, you know, this dot first name and first name. And then for this one, oh, I was wondering why we had this like warnings. But if I put my cursor over here, it only highlights, you know, this first name, but not this one or this one, right? Because they're, you know, the ID is trying to show you that, hey, you know, these are two separate things. And then whenever I hover my mouse, I mean not hover, whenever I put my cursor in first name, the class attribute, it's also going to only highlight the this dot first name instead of, you know, just the first name, right? If I, yeah. So you see, you know, it clearly shows you the differences. Right. So for the constructor, the last thing that we're gonna do is salesman sales. We're gonna be initialize that value to 0. So, you know, again, whenever we create a salesman, usually it's going to be at the beginning of the day. So we're gonna set the salesman sales to 0, since, you know, they have not sold anything yet. Okay, so going back to the getters, let's for this, you know, this one is gonna come in handy whenever we want to print the name of the salesman, especially for the report. So let's create a getter. Remember that the first name and last name are strings, but they're all private, so we cannot access this outside of the salesman class. So let's create a getter. So, and going, you know, if you remember from what we have discussed, a getter function is just a regular function, right? So getters and setters, they're just labels. There's nothing special to them. It's just like they're what they do, pretty much. It describes what they do, right? With a getter, we're just returning the value. So since it is a function and we're returning some value, right, we need to always specify that it's going to be the same type as the value that we want to return, or the value that we want to get. So for this getter function, I'm going to call this get name. It's not going to be get first name or get last name, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to return both, basically, because I want to have the first name and last name. So what I can do is first name and last name, like that. So here we have a getter for both first name and last name. The next thing that I need is going to be the public, the static function. So public static void, and then we're going to be do a print report. Now we have discussed that we cannot access inside this function, right? Because this function is static, right? So we cannot access or try to use first name or last name. The only thing that we can, or you know, salesman sales. The only value that we can have, that we can use inside this function is only going to be global sales, because this is the only static variable, or the static member that we have in the class. But what I want to do is I want to also I don't only want to print just the global cells. I also want to print all these the cells done by each salesman, right? And just to demonstrate you, for example, if I try to do a print statement of first name like this, we're gonna have this issue, which is gonna be cannot make a static reference to a non-static field. So field is going to be another name for the class attributes. So cannot make a static reference to the non-static field first name, right? So we cannot call it the non-static attribute because we're working on a static function. So and also if this was possible, right, we wouldn't know what the value of first name is going to be, right? And if we're able for some reason have print the first name of the object, that kind of defeats the purpose, because we also want to print the first name, last name, and how many cars are sold for each single salesman, right? So in our case, all 3 salesmen. So what we could do is one valid thing that you could do is we can create a salesman object. That's one, and then new salesman. And then let's say, let's put like John for the first name, then last name, Doe, like so, right? And this is fine. So here I cannot print first name, right? I need, since it is depending on an object. So the only object that I have here is S1, which is a salesman object as well. So here I can do dot first name, right? And something about this, something maybe like cool about this is that we can call the first name attribute, because since we're still working within the salesman class, we have visibility of first name, right? But since I want to print for all of them, and I don't want to reinitialize, the same salesman or different salesman objects, what I could do is, since we're working with a salesman array, we can pass a salesman array like here, and then I'll call this all salesmen, like that. So so before we move on, I think the next thing that that's going to be really useful, we have one way to get the first name and last name, right? We could have a getter for salesman sales, but I want to show you all the different things that we have learned so far and how we can use them. So let's override the toString method. So public string, since it returns a string, toString, like that. So going back to some of the discussion that we had about some of the default function that we get, every single class that we're going to create, we have some default functions, right? So if I comment this out, if I do, for example, salesman S1 equals new salesman, so creating a new salesman object, John Doe, like so. We have access to well, first, we don't have access to, for example, this stuff, because they're private, right? We have access to get name, right? So if I try to do get name, here we have our the function that we just created, right? But you're gonna notice that we also have a lot of things, the functions that, even though we have not declared this in the class, we still have access to them. All of these are gonna be attributes that we inherit from the object class. So one of them is gonna be the toString method. So yeah, so this one. And going back to the brief discussion about overriding function, is that you need to make sure to have the same return type, which is a string for the toString method, and then name the function exactly the same way. So toString with a lowercase t, so camel case, right? So let's delete this, and then let's just finish the toString method. So the toString method just returns a string, and this string value is going to be whatever string value that we get whenever we try to print the object. So let's say for formatting, I want to print the first name and last name. I can do the same thing we did here, so we can just copy and paste this. But just to also demonstrate you that you can use the functions inside, we can also call get name, And again, remember that this function call is just a string. It's an expression for a string, and which is gonna be the first name and the last name separated by a space. And then we're gonna also concatenate salesman, and then let's say sold, or cars sold, and then here we can concatenate the salesman sales, so the amount of sales done by that salesman, that particular salesman. So what I could do now is, again, here you have this array of salesmen, and I can safely assume that it's gonna have it's gonna be an array of size 3, right? We're gonna have 3 salesmen, and each of them we're gonna be able to print their name and then how many cars they have sold. So what I can do is I can create a for each loop here. So since we don't need the index, so what we're gonna do now is for each salesman S in all salesmen, I'm going to print S. Now, going back again to the discussion of toString, this is something that you can do. Salesman or S in this case is not a string, but it's a salesman object, right? But we're able to print this because we whatever we print here, right, is going to be whatever we return on the toString method, which is the name, the first and last name, and the amount of cars they have sold, or that particular salesman has sold. So we have that part of the report, and now we just need to finish it up with total amounts of cars sold. So total cars sold, and then here we can just directly reference global sales since it is a static variable, like so. So let's just add a simple comment here. So this one, this member is static, since it is used to print the amount of cars sold by each salesman, but also the total car sold by everybody, or every salesman. I think that's how we want to have to end the comment. Okay, so lastly is going to be implementing the driver, or the main functionality of the program. So the first thing that I think that we should do is going to be creating a salesman array. So salesman, and we can do array with the square bracket, and all salesmen, and new salesman, and then size 3. So we're gonna do a scanner SC of because just to make it make this example a bit more useful, what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask the user for the name for first name and last name of each, and always remember that for scanner you need to import. So hopefully by now this is like almost like muscle memory. Oh, I'm blanking. So java.util.scanner, like that. Almost blanked out right there. So we have the scanner object, and let's also be a bit more meaningful and just say let's add salesman. And to formatting, to make it a bit easier to read, maybe I'm just gonna add an empty space, or an empty line. So now for we're gonna do a for loop. We're not gonna use a for each loop because we need to know the indexes. So we're gonna do I equals 0. I is less than what you could do is all salesman.length. So in the eventuality that we end up with more salesmen, or we want to add more salesmen, we don't need to go and change all of the for loops that we're gonna have, because we're gonna end up with couple for loops instead of like having to change the value here. As long as we change the size here, we're gonna be able to accommodate those new salesmen. So that's thinking ahead. Then I++. So maybe you have noticed the trend, right, with this is that we try in programming, like I mean, depends on the case, right? But would usually we want to be as less specific, right? With this value, I don't know what the value of this expression is going to be, right? But since this is not explicit, right, then it means that the size is going to be depending on this number. So whenever you want to increase this, right, so what we discussed, right, I only need to change this in this part, right? In this case, for this for loop, we don't need to bother about that since we have 4 each. But you're gonna see that we're gonna end up with a couple of regular for loops, which not being specific about the size or the length of the array is gonna be really helpful in the case that we want to add, I don't know, like 100 salesmen. Yeah, but for this, all we're gonna do is we're gonna be asking, so as out, first name, like that, and then here we're gonna have a string first name, and then we're gonna be scanning or reading the user input. So next line, we're gonna do the same thing but for last name. So we're gonna be changing this value to last name and this variable to last name, like that. So now since we know the first name and last name, right, and those are the only thing that we need to create a salesman object, we're gonna be creating, or so you could there's a couple of ways we can do this. So we can do this like more specifically. So salesman is S, yeah, new salesman, pass first name and last name, and then what we could do is we can add this object at index I in our array. So S, like so, right? If you prefer doing this way, this one is going to be the safer way to do this. But also we can do just this, and it's going to be exactly the same thing. The only thing that we're skipping is that we are not, we don't have an extra reference to this object, which in the end is going to get removed by the garbage collector. So another thing that we have discussed. So we can assume that at this point in the code, right? So this point in the code, we're going to have we are going to have an array of salesmen that with each index being initialized by a salesman object. So again, this is one of the assumptions that we can do because we are at this, if we're in this line of code, it means that we have done we have finished this for loop, right? So here maybe we can also say all 3 salesmen were added, and let's add another extra new line to just add yeah, so this is just formatting, so we have everything like separated by lines, so we don't have everything like squished together. Now also thinking ahead, maybe what happens if we have like 100 salesmen, and we're probably gonna have to go through each time we mention the number 3. So what we could do here, we can, instead of like being explicit about the number 3, we can just use all salesmen dot length. So even for this print statement, it is like future proof somewhat, like depending if we want to increase the amount of salesmen. Okay, so for now, for the second part, which is going to be having the program actually running, and then being able to add a new cell and then do the print the report, right? We're gonna have this enclosed in a while loop, right? Because we don't know how many times we're gonna be looping this loop, right? So in those cases, the best fitting type of loop is gonna be a while loop. So there's a lot of ways we can do this. Maybe you can do a do while loop, but personally, I just prefer doing something like this. Maybe it's not the best coding practice, but this is what I'm used to. So what I'm gonna set is pretty much I'm gonna set an infinite loop. Now, if you're gonna do this, you always need to make sure you have the exit case like set, right? We don't want to have an infinite loop going on. So as long as loop the value of loop, which is a boolean, is true, right? We're gonna keep looping. So let's print the sum of the options that the user can do. So one is going to be to add a new car sold, right? So increase the car sold value, and then 2 is going to be end of day report. And we'll have 2 options, right? Because the only way for us to exit the problem is going to be by printing an end of day report. And then in here, let's do an integer variable, so user choice. And for user choice or many choice, I think that's going to be a bit better. We're going to scan the user input, so scan dot next int. Okay, so now we have our if statement. So here we're gonna see have if we can do a switch case statement. Again, this is also gonna be like personal preference. Like at least for me, it looks better. But here, if we have menu choice equals to 1, right? We also have the case where it is else if menu choice equals to 2, and then here we maybe have an else, so like to say like invalid choice or something like that. And then we, let's just add a an empty line at the end of the iteration, so each iteration is going to be separated by a blank line. Again, this is just formatting, personal preference, but in the case on your assignment or lab, it is something that you should follow. That's something that you should compare your output and then maybe like fix your formatting so it matches. That's gonna be helpful with the auto grader. So menu choice number 1 and menu choice 2, and since the first thing that we should do whenever we have a while loop like this, right, an infinite loop basically, we want to make sure that we have our exit case, which is going to be if it is menu choice 2, which is print the report and exit out of the loop. So we can set up loop to false. So whenever we get to this point of the code, right, so we're going to have more lines of code right here, but as long as we get to this line, we're going to be able to exit out of the loop, and it's not going to be an infinite loop anymore, as long the user chooses menu option 2. Now for menu option 1, we want to increase the amount of cars sold by 1, but we also need to increase ask who was the salesman, right? So just for formatting as well, here I'm going to be adding an indentation or \t, so escape sequences. I'm going to ask choose a salesman, and then what we're going to do is also some about formatting. I want to make sure that the first name and last name are going to be the input is going to be next to this line and not on the new line. Makes it a bit look a bit more cleaner. Salesman, and then here we're going to have a for loop, and in this case we're going to have to use an what is this, a regular for loop. You're gonna see why, but again we're gonna do all salesman.length like that, i++, and we're going to be printing, and we're going to be adding a new indentation again. And then here we can add I, or we can use I to print the selection, because this is going to be really useful for the user to choose which salesman, so they don't have to write their name. We just need to write or they need to just input the index value in the array. So that's the reason why we're going to use I here. Close parentheses, just to follow the same formatting that we have going on, and then all salesmen, and then we're gonna be doing I dot get name. So this way we are able to just call the first name and last name. If we did something like this, then we're gonna be printing pretty much their first name, last name, and the car sold, which we could do it, but I think it will be just better to just print their name, and that's it. So after we print all of the different salesmen that we have, we are going to, and also to keep the formatting consistent, I'm going to add a new indentation, but since I want the user input to be also indented, I'm going to make this a print statement, print instead of a println. Then int salesman choice scan next int. And as soon as we enter the the user enters their choice, we're gonna do all salesman salesman choice, which is their the salesman selected, right? And then we're gonna call the car sold, or what do we name this? Oh, actually, yeah, we're forgetting that function. So let's go back. So we have get name, and then we need to be able to set the car as sold. So let's place it maybe like after the getter. So here, let's call this public void car sold. And the only thing that we do here, we just increase the salesman sales by 1. And then we increase the global sales by 1. And maybe we also want to print out something like this. So again, remember that this is going to be a reference to the actual object. So whenever you do print ln this, we're going to be printing the toString of whichever object we are using. We are accessing the car sold function. So for example, if we chose the salesman John Doe, and we call the car sold function by choosing John Doe, right? We'll be printing John Doe's a full the first and second name, first and last name, and how many cars are sold. So pretty much we'll be calling the toString method by doing this. Okay, so we have the car sold. Okay, now we just need to work on the menu choice 2, which is going to be, let's add a print ln to make it more consistent with our formatting. And then salesman. Now, since we want to call it the print report, right, and this is a static function, what we need to do is we need to call it with the class name. Remember that in the previous discussion we have mentioned that static members, right? So static variables, static functions, they are related to the class. So their value is attached to the class itself. So if you try to use a salesman object to access the print report function, it's gonna be it's doable. There's not a syntax error, right? So all salesmen at 0, right? And then we can do car print report, right? But you're gonna see you have a warning. There's not a syntax error. You're still gonna compile and it's still going to work exactly the same. But what's gonna happen is that it's gonna give you this warning saying that, hey, this function print report is a static, so there's no reason for us to specify an object, because regardless of which object it is, it's still going to be the same. So how we should, or the proper way to call this is gonna be with by calling it through the class name, and by class name I mean the actual class name, so salesman with a capital S. And remember that one of the parameters that we have for print report is going to be the all salesman array, right? Since we need to know all the different salesmen that we have, so we pass this, and it's going to print all the sales done by each salesman, and at the end it's going to print the how many cars everybody has sold in total. And lastly, we're going to print in this else statement. So if the user chose any number other than 1 or 2, we're going to print invalid choice, or invalid choice, like that. Okay, so this is a whole program. This is going to be uploaded in GitHub, so don't worry about this if you have not kept track on all the code. Let me just add a comment here, so you can see like what we're trying to do here. So we're gonna use this function. So use when a salesman closes a sale, it increases the individual sale and the global sale amount. So pretty much what we're doing here. I don't think it's worth mentioning this, but by just looking at this, you can see, hey, we're printing, we're calling the toString method by doing this. We can do print this toString, or in this case maybe we could also do print what is this dot toString, but it doesn't really matter. You can just do it this way. And also for in this case, you don't need to, it's not necessary to call the toString method, because by doing this it is implied that we're calling the toString method. Okay, so let's start the program, and well, I already tested this program, so let me just clear my terminal up. And for first name, so for the first salesman, we're gonna be adding, I don't know, John and then Doe. And then for the second salesman, let's do James Smith, I don't know. And for the second one, I'm running out of names, so I'm gonna be doing it myself. Okay, so whenever you want to add or add a a sale, right? So let's say that that John Doe was able to finish a sale. We're gonna choose option 1, and we're gonna be able to see this menu, and it's gonna be indented, so we can see clearly the differences. So here we can choose, for example, let's say that John Doe closed this one, so we're gonna add, enter 0, and we're gonna be printing John Doe cars sold 1, right? So they have John Doe sold 1 car. Let's do again 1, and then let's do another one for James Smith, and then we're gonna sell another car, and this one is gonna be me. Another one, and let's say I did better, so I sold 2 cars. So we know that James sold 1 car. Joe and John sold 1 car, so we have 2 cars sold at this point, and then I sold 2 cars more. So in total, we should have 4 cars sold in total, and then 1 for John, 1 for James, and 2 for me. So if I do end of date report, this is going to be the value that we could get. So John Doe sold 1 car, James Smith 1 car, Unique car sold 2 cars. And we know this, or this is valid because remember that whenever we print the individual cell, we are using the salesman sales. So it's going to be the value of this attribute is going to be based on the on this attribute, and for total cars sold, right, it's going to be the static variable, which is going to be global, the same value for every single object. But yeah, so this code is going to be available on GitHub, so make sure you review this and just play around with this, modify like a couple lines of code, see what's happened. Maybe one thing that you could try do, right, is instead of printing the get name, just let's call the toString method and see what happens, right? But yeah, so if you have any questions, you can always email me or message me through Teams or pass my office hours. So yeah.